Good afternoon. I'm Filippo Fasulo, co-head of the Economic Center at ISPI, and I'm glad to host you today at this event of the RoadMap Dialogues event. The title of today's webinar is Exploring New Synergies for Sustainable Trade, and is organized by ISPI in cooperation with PMI Impact. Here today with us, we have three outstanding speakers. Let me introduce, first of all, Lilia Hachem-Nas, Chief Office for the MENA Region International Trade Center. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here.
And Zuzana, Global Head, International Trade Policy, Philip Morris International. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to everyone.
And Antonio Parenti, Head of the European Commission Representation in Italy. Good afternoon. Okay, today what we want to do is to discuss about a very relevant topic. A very relevant topic is how to boost trade, how to restart trade, how to deal with international trade that is being threatened and disrupted by multiple crises in the recent years. First from the pandemic, then came the war in Ukraine, and so more often we do listen, we do hear, and we discuss about issues like sustainability of trade, reshoring, nearshoring practices, and how to make supply chains more resilient. So I think, first of all, we have to start with a clear assessment of what happened in the past few years. So I would like to ask to Lilia Hachem-Nas, from your point of view, how does the current crisis, and we have many crises, I say the war in Ukraine, the COVID pandemic, and now we are seeing how the system situation is fragmented, and even great power competition. So how this current crisis impact on sustainable trade in the region?
Thank you, Filippo. Thank you very much. Thank you for the SP and the organizers for having me here today. I would like to answer your questions. Maybe we should look back a little bit further than just the crisis, to say that the Mediterranean region is not really a homogeneous region. It's very heterogeneous, but it is known, and it has been assessed in many research, that it has not actually achieved its full economic potential for many years in the past. So when the COVID crisis started, it came to a region that was already fragile on many aspects. First of all, political instability. We all know what is called today what has been called so far the Arab Spring, started in 2011. So there was a lot of unstable, turnover of political regimes and instability socially and economically. In addition to that, there was the big issue of food security. The countries in the South Mediterranean countries are heavily dependent on imports. They have increased the demand for agricultural products by 6 times since the 1960s. And one striking statistics I came across is that the fact that the MENA region, that only represents 4% of the world population, accounts for 30% of world wheat imports or purchases. So it's really a huge consumption. The third element is the fact that the young population is increasing, but the unemployment as well. The economies have not been able to generate enough employment to absorb the demand coming on the market. And the final point I want to mention in terms of the fragility is the climate change, and the fact that the region is really subject to harsh climate conditions, high temperatures, and it has only worsened. So when the first crisis hit, if I may say the first, because there were many other crises, but when the COVID crisis hit, it had really a dramatic impact on the fragile region. And the impact is mainly due to the fact that we had to go through lockdown measures. So the lockdown measures disturbed the supply side and the demand side, and this has negatively impacted the productive sectors in the South Mediterranean region and their capacity to maintain the same level of activity and the same level of growth in terms of economy. So in fact, they lost part of an important part of their GDP. I think on average it's 8% of GDP over the 2 years of COVID. But at the same time, what COVID had shown is really the striking differences between the regions, and it has shown the inequalities across the countries, across some regions in the country, and it has produced, it has resulted in increased unemployment and a bigger gap in terms of inequality and poverty. Then, so fragile situation, COVID-19, it's even worse. And as soon as the countries were starting to recover a little bit, comes the war between Ukraine and Russia, and this not only continued the disruption in terms of supply chain, but it added another element of risk, which is really access to food and commodities, basic commodities for the Mediterranean countries. For example, by the end of February 2022, the tensions on the access energy, access fertilizers, and have the food at their highest. And it's really creating a lot of instability in the region. So in a nutshell, I think between the two crises, the latest two crises, we had the supply chain disruptions, which has impacted productive sectors, but also services sector, and impacted the welfare in terms of society. We have the food insecurity with increasing price for food, increasing the poverty. I mean, impacting and increasing people at the edge of poverty, if not falling into poverty, and really creating more social tension and more disruptions. And then, of course, the fact that the priorities have shifted, and sustainable trade is no longer really a priority. You have to focus on putting food on the table, on maintaining your productive sector, even if it means that you have to access energy that is not necessarily sustainable, or other sources of for inputs for your production chains that are not sustainable. So I think this is maybe not a very glaring picture. At the same time, we know that the crisis open and unlock opportunity, open the door for new opportunities, and I'm sure we will go there in the next question to speak more about the opportunities that come up with such crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So many crises had a deep impact on fragile countries, but at the same time, potential to grow and probably new opportunities unlocked by this crisis. So this was the point of view of how the crisis impacted on countries. But let's try to change our point of view, and now to try to share the point of view of companies and how the crisis hit the companies. So Andres Gujana, from your point of view, can you provide an assessment of the impact of the current crisis on companies, and especially in particular on the sustainability dimension?
Yes, thank you very much, Filippo, for the invitation to PMI and myself to be here today. I think the question is, of course, very, very important and very broad. So maybe let me start with a few facts that I think are important to provide the context of this discussion. First, despite all the talks, all the discussions, articles about the end of globalization and the idea that we are in a deglobalization at the moment, the most recent figures from different sources, but for instance, the WTO trade report from just a couple of weeks ago, show that despite all the challenges posed by the COVID, by the war in Ukraine, and other geopolitical challenges, trade flows have been very resilient, and trade continues to grow. And there are different signs of this in terms of trading goods, trading environmental goods, digital trade. So first fact, I think, is that this idea of deglobalization doesn't seem to be supported by current figures. Secondly, and despite what I just mentioned, it is correct, I think, and data also confirmed that there is a worrying trend, I would say, of a number of new protectionist measures being implemented by different countries around the world, particularly in the last 3 years. For instance, data coming from Global Trade Alert, which is an independent foundation monitoring policies that affect world trade, show that before the pandemic, the average of harmful government interventions were around 2,000 to 3,000 per year. And in 2020, that number increased to almost 6,000 in that year. On this, we are talking about the tariffs, but we're also talking about the measures affecting investment, safeguards, local content requirements, and other protectionist measures that, at the end of the day, discriminate against foreign commercial interests. Similar numbers are also shown in the context of the WTO when you look at the trade concerns being reviewed or discussed at the TBT committee, at the Trading Council. So I think second idea that I would like to highlight is that, yes, it is correct and it's true that there are a number of new trade barriers being implemented globally. And third, last but not least, actually, we can also see that despite all this context, there is a very important number of free trade agreements that are in force, more than 360 at this moment, according to WTO figures as well. And also a very important number of free trade negotiations taking place in different regions of the world, including, of course, in the Med region and in Africa. These FTAs are slightly different compared to the previous ones because they are expanding in terms of scope. And for instance, sustainability-related issues are now being discussed. So this is the third fact that I would like to highlight, to provide or try to provide an answer to your question, which I think is that the main impact of the current crisis, the geopolitical challenges that companies are facing, is that there is a very high level of uncertainty. The impact of the crisis is that today there is a much more complex business environment for companies, of course, for MSMEs, but also for global companies that operate at global level and that need to deal with a number of new regulations, new protectionist measures, and also in a more fragmented world. So doing business today seems to be a bit more complex. And now in this context, for companies to achieve their sustainability objectives in this more complex scenario is probably more difficult. The fragmentation, of course, increase the number of difficulties to achieve these sustainability objectives that companies or many companies have put in place. In the case of PMI, just to give you one concrete example about our company, sustainability is at the core of our strategy. We have a very clear framework and objectives that address both the impact of our product and also the impact of our operations globally. In terms of our product, as some of you may know, we are transforming the company in the last few years. We have started to transform the company with the objective to phase out cigarettes. And the most important contribution that we can make to sustainability is to confront the health impact of cigarettes by trying to replace these products with scientifically substantiated, less harmful alternatives. For the time being, I think I will leave it there. So maybe we can have more time for questions or clarification afterwards.
Thank you so much. So actually, we have seen till now how the crisis impacted the region, so countries in the region, and then how they impacted the companies. So let's try to move a step on and try to understand what an actor, a regional player, even if it's northern regional player, is doing there. So I will ask to Antonio Parenti, what is the EU doing to promote sustainable trade in the region?
Thank you to ISPI and first of all for the invitation to discuss. It would be easy for me to answer precisely your question later this month, because in October there's going to be the ministerial conference of the Union of Mediterranean on trade, and indeed sustainable trade is going to be on the agenda as the first point on the agenda of that conference. So I don't want to spoil what's going to happen in that conference. That will not be fair. But what I think we should take into consideration is that we have in front of us right now a scenario which takes us first to 2030, 2035, and then to 2050, which is the scenario which will bring Europe to be a net zero carbon emitter. And that means, of course, integrate into that equation trade, especially in the Mediterranean, would make not a lot of sense to go to zero in our part of the world if we cannot have then a similar pattern of development in the countries around us. I mean, I think in that context, the Mediterranean region come at a very, very important and crucial moment, because the passage that we will have to do towards our current system of production to the future one will need the contribution, especially of the southern countries of the northern countries of the Mediterranean, if you want, part of the bordering the Mediterranean Sea with Italy, Spain, and Greece. I'm talking certainly about energy. First of all, a lot of the future energy, of the quantity of hydrogen that we may need, will have to come from that regions, because there is much more. Sorry, posthumes of a cold, to be able to get in those areas than in remaining parts of Europe. And this can also be an occasion to look more carefully, and we are doing this with projects like the Global Gateway, on how to build sustainable chains for production of products which are, of course, destined to the European market, but will also be destined to other markets. One of the issues, and it was already transpiring in the relation of what has been said by the person who spoke before me. One of the issues, of course, the necessity to bring most of these countries also on the same level and the same playing field with us. I know maybe we will talk about regulation later on, but in order to, without going into the regulation, in order to be able to facilitate such a complex jump in production, which will be required by a net zero type of economy, of course, scale will be important. So it's really important that we have FTAs with these countries, but it would be also important that these countries have a much more integrated market among themselves. So I think that we will be spending quite some time in the near future in working and facilitating if not the creation of common markets, there is an idea of an African, everyone knows there's an idea of an African global FTA, but certainly moving forward in a certain part of the northern on the northern shore of Africa will be absolutely great to facilitate certain capacity to be inserted fully in our value chains. And I think there is a huge potential there. because most of there's a lot of discussion about reshoring. Not all reshoring must be done into Europe. It makes no sense. There is a lot of reshoring that can be done into North Africa, and we also need to look forward. There are some proposals which are being discussed. One is the one who's come from the former President Prodi, to have very closer connection between the universities, in a way to be able to create people who will be capable of working and have their diploma recognized on both sides of the Mediterranean. I think also issues like this, which can tackle one very fundamental issue, which is also linked to migration, can be very useful in bringing our relationship to a next level. And I think this is the time to bring that relationship to that level.
Thank you so much. So more integration is needed, we have to say, in order to solve global crises and multiple global crises we are facing right now. So much is in the pipeline, and we will discover it by the end of this month. So we are really looking forward to see what the EU is preparing on this topic soon. But probably we should also focus on what has already been done in the past, and what we can do to better use existing regulations. So I will ask Lilia Achemnas, so how can the region better use existing FTAs, because we can prepare and present all the regulation, the best regulation we have, but then if they just stay in theory and they're not applied properly, then their effect is minimal. So what to do with existing FTAs, how to better improve the use of them?
Thank you again for giving me the floor. I think I will follow from where Mr. Paranti stopped. It is correct that the region is seen as being strategically positioned, because it is a region, at least for the South Mediterranean region, it is a region between Europe, Asia, and Africa, and it has actually many FTAs with different sub-regions that allows it to have preferential or better access to different markets. However, up to today they have not been able to benefit, and the reason for that is that, first of all, with parallel free trade agreements, it creates an even more complex environment to understand which provisions to use and what time to use them, etc. But more importantly is that this is a region based on different analyses, including the analysis from ITC, this is a region that is the most protected and has most obstacles in the world between countries themselves. So the obstacles are not necessarily towards Europe or towards African countries, but really between the countries in the sub-region, and it makes it the least integrated region. And these obstacles are more related to non-tariff measures, to procedural obstacles. Many of the measures actually are due to internal reasons and can be resolved by internal consultations and internal reforms. So this is, I think, one step that the countries need to take to be able to benefit more from the FTAs, is to create a more enabling and more conducive business environment within the country and between the countries in the region. We have done a study on non-tariff measures in the Arab countries, and the results are striking. And this is the study we did was based on the survey of the private sector, so it is really the voice of the enterprises, and it is very interesting to see what they face in terms of barriers. So it's reform in terms of procedures, but also reforms in terms of policy and in terms of attracting businesses, attracting investment, and promoting trade, particularly export. The other thing that I wanted to mention is, if again to add to what was said before me, if we really want to create this collaborative environment and complement and complementarity between countries in terms of markets, I think we need to identify those priority sectors that really have the potential to make this happen and understand all the problems they are facing. For example, in the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area, we did an analysis at the input-output level, 6-digit, for all the trade exchanges between the countries. And what we came to is that there are at least 23 value chains that can be made regionally within continental Africa, and that can connect 33 countries with inputs and outputs coming from Africa. So already, if we have that information, we could start working on those sectors to look at what kind of skills are needed and how to upskill the people in the sectors, how to make sure that the connection is seamless, the logistics are easy. So what kind of infrastructure is needed? How do we better use the potential of information technology and digitalization to get the countries closer? I think such analysis across the Mediterranean with the European countries and South Mediterranean country would really allow that complementarity and to implement specific solutions and policy measures that will favor and ensure that we achieve that potential and we can actually connect the different value chains and make them more sustainable regionally. But this also will result in increased local value addition within the countries, let's say within Africa or within South Mediterranean countries, which will create a positive circle of creating employment, creating a new dynamic, and giving a chance for the companies within our countries to grow. Being competitive with the European market will also make those companies probably well positioned to enter new markets, such as the African market or the Asian market. So in a summary, I think the Mediterranean countries can be a good bridge to link the two sides of the Mediterranean, the northern side with the African side, and also the eastern side. But a lot of components have to be in place. That includes a good business environment, that includes a good education, includes good skills, competencies in the countries. It includes also well-managed, well-dynamic, very good dynamic business sector. But those components will only be in place if we tackle them from a concrete angle, and specific opportunities that we see can be achieved to realize this potential. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's very interesting what you are saying. So actually what we are realizing is that the international scenario is more and more complex, and we do need more knowledge, more skills, new skills, and that skills should be shared across the two shores of the Mediterranean. But probably we should consider also another subject that is very relevant in terms of boosting economic activity, it's the companies. And what we can see is that most of the time, multinationals have the resources to better understand what is going on, especially with this kind of multiple crises, and to try to pursue or to provide their employees with the needed tools to understand what is going on. So my question is to Anders Guggiano. If this is the case for multinational, what about SMEs? What about small and medium enterprises? How is possible that small and medium enterprises can navigate these global trends? And how is possible to provide them with resources to answer those questions?
Thanks for the question. I think there are probably two different angles to answer that. I will try to do it first from what I think the public sector can do, and then what the private sector can do. In terms of the public sector, I think governments, of course, play a very important, if not a key role in supporting MSMEs. And I think the most important contribution that they can probably do is to open markets and to try to keep a level playing field for MSMEs in their markets, but also through trade negotiations in third markets. All the protectionist measures that I mentioned in my previous comments, and as you point out, Filippo, global companies are probably much better equipped to deal with the complexities of global trade today. The MSMEs normally don't have the resources to deal with this complexity, and that is why I think having clear trade rules is essential. It's a must for MSMEs, and this is again what I think is the best contribution that governments can do. And if I can be a bit more specific here, there were some mentions to the FTAs, and I think of course this is important because on FTAs we're not only talking about tariffs, we're talking about trade facilitation, that I think is a key issue these days, particularly for the African region. I would say customs related issues, digitalization of border requirements. There are really a number of different aspects that can be improved in the context of these FTA negotiations. The African FTA, I think, is a great example of a very important number of countries working to try to streamline these regulations to facilitate trade. But there is another very good example in the Mediterranean, Euro-Mediterranean region, which is the Pan-Euro-Mediterranean Convention on Rules of Origin. I think this is a very good example of collaboration on a very technical issue, but that is essential to facilitate trade in the region. And I think it's great that in the last years we have seen a very important effort and collaboration between the EU and many other countries in Northern Africa, Eastern Europe, to try to update these rules to recognize the difficulties or the new challenges that the business sector has. The dialogue with the business sector, I think, is essential. You know, government officials are, of course, experts in trade, but sometimes and they are not experts in the different trade areas. So I think it's very important to talk to the different businesses, to the MSMEs, to understand what are the challenges that these companies are facing, because sometimes it's very specific and detailed issues that companies are facing and that prevent them for exporting. So I think this is something that government and government officials can do. And now from the private sector perspective, I think probably the most important role that global companies can play is to provide fair conditions and opportunities to MSMEs to collaborate with the companies and to participate either directly or indirectly in global supply chains. And I think in this regard, we have, in the case of our company, a very good example precisely in Italy, where we have, which is at the core of the transformation process of the company that I mentioned. As some of you may know, we have a very important investment in our factory in Crespellano, where we produce heated tobacco products. Is the most important factory in the world where we produce these innovative smoke-free products. And in all the construction and work that we do there is a lot of interaction in a very important value chain in terms of the collaboration with MSMEs in the agricultural sector. There are more than 1,000 MSMEs in the agricultural sector collaborating with us. We have more than 8,000 suppliers in Italy that work with us to be able to produce these heated tobacco products that we then export from Italy. There is also a lot of collaboration with innovative startups. There is a network of more than 50,000 retailers. So I think this is a good example that is, of course, to some extent replicated in other countries in the Euro-Mediterranean region, where we show how global companies can collaborate and provide room to MSMEs to participate in global supply chains.
So the role and the action of all the companies are important in the region. So it's important, as you say, to create a good level playing field in the region for all of them. Before asking Antonio Parenti the following question, I just want to remind all our viewers today that they can present their question in the chat, and we are going to have a Q&A session at the end of the first part of this discussion. So please, Antonio Parenti, I just want to ask you, as you already mentioned, that there are some differences probably in the region, and probably sometimes even if there are existing regulations, the regulations are not well adopted, well served by all the actors in the region. So I will ask you, how is possible to bridge European and MENA regions regulations on trade?
Well, I don't think that there is a silver bullet answer to this question, because indeed, as noticed before, there are a number of different trade barriers, and we have noticed that in certain states over the year there has been also developed what you can call almost a comparative advantage in creating certain non-tariff barriers. What I think is important to understand, and I think here we need to work together with these countries, is that most of these barriers at the end, they have a result which is not simply negative for the trade, but is more negative for the development of the economies of scale and possibly economic integration. It's not easy because, I mean, technical barriers often also respond to very clear concern of certain countries, but there are often also ways to create them or to construct them in a way that they do not impede necessarily trade, but take care of specific concerns. Many barriers related, for example, to health of product come to mind. We are working with them. We constantly been working. We will continue working. I think some results have been obtained, but what I think is really necessary is entering into a joint understanding, a joint forma mentis to a certain extent, that will see our economies as not simply interlinked as such, but as progressing towards a common goal. And here I come back to what I was saying before. I mean, I think we see now in the Mediterranean, and for years to come, notwithstanding all the tensions that we have, notwithstanding the difficulties in Ukraine, and notwithstanding the strong presence of Chinese companies and Chinese officials in a lot of these countries, we do see right now an occasion which is an incredible one for taking forward a relationship between the European Union and the MENA countries. And I think this can be really positive for both. To make those relationship coming forward, we need to be able to integrate much better the respective markets. And to do so, of course, we need to try to arrive towards a very similar or very almost common regulation. Of course, what can be pretended by countries that belong to the European Union in terms of development is not necessarily the same what can be expected or requested to country at a lower economic level of development. But if we are working together, I think we can obtain that result over time, and I think it's going to be useful for the European Union, but I hope it will also be perceived as useful by the countries in the MENA region.
Thank you. Actually, we are receiving many questions, so I will try just to present some of them and to summarize some of them, and then ask each speaker to answer on the issues they know better. So the first question would be if you know any project or any country that you think can be indicated as a positive example of sustaining sustainable trade in the region. Another one is how to solve the barriers to trade among Arab countries. Another one is how to support technological transfer and know-how between companies in the northern shore of the Mediterranean region and the southern one and the southern part. Another one is if mechanism such one, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, can maybe disrupt trade between Europe and the southern neighborhood. And a last one we just received, I think it's quite interesting, but so I would like to listen to your opinion, is how is possible to sustain cooperation between Europe and the MENA region without falling into a kind of quasi-colonial relationship. So probably here is the matter of global south and global north that is very much discussed in the recent weeks and recent months as well. So I will start with the same order. So please, Lilia Shamnas, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you again. Yes, very interesting questions. I didn't capture all of them, but one of them is about how to solve barriers between Arab countries. I think, like many trade negotiations, it's really public-private dialogue between the countries, but it's important to distinguish between the obstacles or barriers that are within the country itself and have to be solved within the country, and then between countries, to discuss those issues and really to try and harmonize, reform trade policies, reform what is imposed on other countries, and try to get closer with in terms of harmonization. Of course, I think all of these countries are part of GAFTA, which is the Greater Arab Free Trade Agreement, but the negotiations have started long ago, but it's still not totally in operation. It is in operation, not totally used, or totally. It has not really created a business environment that is expected. That's one. If the measure by the European Union, probably Mr. Parenti will be better positioned to answer, but I think yes, CBAM will be not disturbed, but will be another layer of complexity to answer for the businesses in the South Mediterranean countries to be able to align with the requirements of CBAM. And this is one example where cooperation between the two sides of the Mediterranean can help businesses, and small businesses particularly, understand what it is and understand how they can be up to speed to align with such measures. In terms of the last question, not talking about colonialism, but more, I think the world is a small world, and we all live, and we have seen with the different crises that the world is really a big village at the end, and only cooperation and collaboration will enable us to achieve the sustainable development goal, the sustainability, and achieve more welfare and more decent life for all. I think we see the dramatic impact of this gap between the North and the South, between some countries in the same region, others in terms of displacement, in terms of illegal migration, in terms of poverty, in terms of access to basic services. We are all in it together, and I think we all gain by putting hand in hand and really working towards the same objective. And of course, the various crises have shown us the limits of the globalization as it is today. And this is a great opportunity to embrace the nearshoring through more collaboration between neighboring countries for the benefit of all the countries part of that collaboration. So I totally agree that this is a new, this is a concrete opportunity to look at things from a different angle and make them happen for the benefit of all. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this wise words. So, Anders Gujana, what do you think about the questions? Probably you might be interested, especially in tech transfers between companies in the region, or whatever you want to say about all the other questions.
No, thanks, Filippo. I was actually thinking about this question, which is of course very relevant. I think technology transfer has been a topic in the trade agenda for many years, since the TRIPS agreement, actually, or even before, but at least since the TRIPS agreement of the WTO was implemented, tech transfer is a topic. I think I will go back to what I mentioned earlier in terms of the collaboration, and the fact that companies of different sizes, I think, by participating in global supply chains, they can develop their own technologies. This has been, to some extent, the case in our case, and I'm talking from our perspective, to create the heated tobacco products in which we have invested more than 10 billion USD in the last 8 or 10 years. There has been a lot of participation of different companies that in the process and working with us, they have created and developed their own IP. So they have moved to a different level of sophistication, if you wish, by participating and collaborating with us. But of course, I recognize this is an important and difficult issue, because you also need to have and ensure that the companies and the public sector as well has the capabilities to work in this area, which is not simple. In terms of some of the other questions and the barriers among the Arab countries, I will not pretend to be an expert on that at all. But what I can say, and I'm thinking in what I'm seeing in many other countries around the world, is that there is a political decision at the end of the day. This is today, trade and politics are more and more related, if not completely interlinked. So I would say that political decision and the willingness to collaborate in the trade domain, I think, is key. I would leave it there. Again, I'm not an expert on the Arab countries, but I think this is a key element. And there are some recent examples of countries in Asia and in other parts of the world where we are seeing that some taboos are being bred in terms of trade and collaboration. On the CBAM, I will not enter that territory. I would leave that to Mr. Parenti. I think just one general comment, which is applicable to the CBAM, and I think is part of the discussion, but it's also important in terms of the precedent for other countries. I think any measure such as this, I think, is very important, that is fully consistent with the WTO agreements and the multilateral system. I think this is a prerequisite to ensure that all these measures that have very important objectives do not transform into some kind of disguised protectionism. Yes, I would leave it there. Those would be my comments from the time being.
Thank you so much. Actually, you won't be an expert probably, but knowledge from companies, practical knowledge from companies are always welcome. So especially practical views to understand what is going on. So thank you so much for your comment on that. Antonio Parenti. So please, if you have anything to say about the question presented by our viewers, please.
Yeah, well, let's start with CBAM. CBAM is not an instrument of trade protection. Is an instrument of facilitating the ambition that the European Union has set for itself in the climate area. In our opinion, it is fully compliant with WTO rules. It also covers, for the time being, at least a very limited number of products. I think it's 6 or 7 which are covered, which are the most energy intensive. And for those products until 2025, the only commitment that we request in countries, non-European countries, is to let us know what is the content of carbon produced in their production, basically, in the production of those products. So for the time being, we are at a total and a very simple data gathering phase. We will move eventually to a different phase post 2025. This gives us some time to explain CBAM, to let companies also in other countries to adapt, and of course to explain how they reach goals. Doesn't necessarily have to be exactly the same way that we do it in Europe. Given the structure of CBAM, I can't imagine this being a huge impediment to trade to the MENA region. I mean, if we think about a future relationship about energy, and we're talking about hydrogen, for example, or solar energy, there's nothing more green than those two type of energy. So CBAM will not even enter into the equation there. What I think is more important is the question, or the one I would like to answer, is the question on the last one, on how to work with these countries avoiding a colonialist or neo-colonialist attitude. Now, it's extremely easy to fall into the trap of saying, we listen to you, but because we are the biggest guys in the block, everything is fine, but you do as we say. This is always a risk. Now, please do note that for what I can see, when I see new countries joining or coming into certain areas of Africa, it's not that I do see a very different attitude in terms of power politics. I mean, the impact of Chinese or Russian investment in certain areas, and on certain field, I have difficulties of calling them investments, but fair enough. When we think of, for example, Wagner in the Sahel region, it's difficult to call that an investment. It's more difficult not to call it colonialist. But let's stick to the MENA region. These relationships needs, of course, to be nurtured and needs to take into consideration and understand what the respective needs are. What is more fundamentally, though, and that I think is what can really avoid any form of neocolonialism or most simply avoid any disillusion with each other, is sharing a common objective. Because if we talk about going into a zero net CO2 emission by a certain date, and certain countries may decide not to go in that direction, in whatever term, whatever time, that is going to be very difficult to maintain a very bilaterally proficient relations. It's not a matter of colonialism or not colonialism. It is a matter of assuring that we try to go in a certain direction with our economy, and we are open to work, understand, facilitate, help other countries in achieving similar results. I don't think that right now maintaining the level of the temperature worldwide below 1.5 degrees is colonialism. I think is safeguarding the future of the future generations wherever they are. And normally in this time of the world is mostly in the south of the world more than in the north, since we have a very strong denatality problem. So the question is really, and it's not an easy question, are these society ready to embark on this type of transformation? If so, then I think we can work together very, very well. If not, if they prefer other pathway to development, our door will always remain open. Those countries are countries which are extremely important for us. We will never turn our back on them. But it's clear that it's going to be more complicated to create positive value chain, positive economic interactions if we do not share the same goals. It's going to be natural because what is going to happen, and I think we need to be very aware, in the next 30 to 40 years in Europe, is going to be, sorry, to 2050, so 25 years, is going to be a very radical transformation of the production system, which is going to be extremely expensive for the European taxpayer. So I think we need to be very clear with everyone that we are not doing this to protect the European industry or to protect the European population. We are doing this because often we have been told, you are not leading. Well, now we are leading. And we are leading because many ask us to lead. But if you want us to lead, then you also need to be on board with us. If you want us to lead and then, how can I say, and take advantage of that in a positive manner, ready to do this. If you want us to lead and then take advantage in a negative manner, of course, it's going to be much more complicated to have a positive relationship. I'm absolutely certain that we will have a positive environment and a positive determination, but it clear this is sovereign decision of third countries, not a decision that the European Union can impose.
Thank you so much. Actually, we not find any silver bullet to take some from of your words in this hour, but I think we had a very fruitful discussion, and I really want to thank you all for being here with us. Time, unfortunately, is running out, and so we had this very interesting, from my point of view, and I hope also from your point of view, Rome Dialogues event on exploring new synergies for sustainable trade. Let me thank Lilia Chemnas, Chief Office for the MENA Region International Trade Center, Andres Gurjana, Global Head International Trade Policy, Philip Morris International, and Antonio Parenti, Head of the European Commission Representation in Italy. Thank you so much, and see you soon.
Thank you.